Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second author of the day, Russell Blackwell. Unfortunately, we had a bit of technical issues with Russell, and so his camera is not showing, but we've decided we're going to go ahead and persevere through this, and we're going to do a makeup session out of cycle. If people follow me on Spotify, I also do a program called the Author's Cut, where I take the authors from 24 hours and put them on there, or 24 authors in 12 hours, put them on there. And so, Russell and I will do another one for the Author's Cut, and but we wanted to do the live session. We wanted to make sure that if you're watching today for the kind of marathon virtual book festival, and so Russell, you want to share with us where you're from and where you're tuning in from?
I'm from the United Kingdom, a town called Wrexham, which is about 20 miles south of Liverpool. I now live in Birmingham, England, which is about 100 miles further south in the Midlands. And I've lived here for 35 years, actually.
So, Russell, I don't know if you know this, but I actually graduated from the University of Liverpool with a master's degree. So,
really?
Yeah. So, I do have that little bit of UK Beatles experience going on in me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Well, I was at the Polytechnic. I was at John Moores, Liverpool, John Moores. It was called the Polytechnic in them days, 40 odd years ago.
I always wonder with young people now, do they even know who the Beatles are, right? Like that was like even above my generation. So it's kind of interesting to think about how the world changes and the icons. Russell, I want to talk to you as an author about your books. And the first one that we're going to talk about is the Architects of America, which I think is super interesting that you wrote this from a British perspective.
Yeah. The basic... It's not a novel. It's a straightforward, in my view, theory that I have about the geography of your country, that far from it being accidental, it is architectural. It adds up to an architectural phenomenon, which might sound a bit far-fetched, but it's... trying to think of an easy way in. First of all, let's take it from the beginning. In the 18th century, you've got the colonies on the eastern seaboard. You've got, in 1732, you've got 12 colonies from Massachusetts in the north down to South Carolina in the south. In 1733, you get a 13th colony out of Georgia. Now, what's interesting about Georgia is it's on the 33rd parallel. And well, let's put it quickly. The British always claimed all the territory to the west of their colonies, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So you've got a rough rectangle of land. It's only theoretical, of course, about 3,000 miles by 1,000 miles, from the 45th parallel in the north to the 33rd in the south. That's 13 parallels land. And like I say, down to the 33rd parallel. What's also interesting is you've got 13 colonies ending in Georgia now, which is named after the 33rd monarch since William the Conqueror. And then you've also got time. You're in the 13th decade of Britain's involvement in North America, since going on from 1607, the Jamestown colony. And it's in the 33rd year of the 18th century. So this pattern keeps on coming through, 13, 33rd. And what I argue in my book is that the same pattern goes all the way through American history up to 1959 and when Hawaii becomes a 50th state. And it's an architectural phenomenon, like I say, based on the new numbers and whatever, and of 33 and 13.
That is super interesting. And if you want to check out Russell's book, I have put the link to it in the chat. And one of the things I do want to highlight about this show is 24 authors in 12 hours is an author helping author event. There is no cost whatsoever. And the thing about authors right now is they are getting inundated, I'm sure Russell is too, with people who are well-meaning or not so well-meaning and who are constantly trying to part us with our money. And this is a no-cost event. I do accept donations though, and we do have some merch. If you want to support the show, I appreciate it. And what that really does is help for me to maintain things like the streaming site that I use, as well as helping me to maintain the website and things like that, and to just keep the show going. But I started the show during COVID. If you listened in the last segment with Sabrina Protect, she was on the show back in 2020 when COVID happened, right? And so it was definitely like an opportunity for us to figure out a new way to start marketing and sharing our books. And I really want to share a little bit more. Russell wrote a second book, 1954, and this book is actually a novel. I'm going to be putting that link into the chat. And let's share a little bit about your other book, Russell, your book 1954.
I think it's a bit more simple to describe this one in that it's basically my attempt at a prequel to 1984. Highlights events in an alternative timeline in the mid-1950s where East and West do go to blows and you get the emergence of a malevolent superstate out of what was the West, where the USA pretty much takes over what's left of Britain, even though the USA has got hammered as well, and the Soviet Union takes over Western Europe. And therefore, you've got the beginning of the two superstates, Oceania and Eurasia, that George Orwell talks about. And it's basically about how institutions and people are perverted by tyranny into becoming things that they weren't originally, where they start to behave differently and they become malevolent in their own right, which I think is, I wrote this at the right time, basically.
And I think super timely. I actually wrote speculative fiction book that I'm putting in the chat right now. And this book is projected to be 2055. And where are we then? And so I think our books kind of bookend here between this 1954 and then 2055, like 100 years later, what's going on. Yeah. And so I think it's very interesting that, around the same time frame, we both had these approaches. Let's talk a bit about 1954, this kind of prequel book to 1984. And where we are now in society. What's helped us inspire you, and kind of what are your thoughts on that?
I think I've always had, I'd call it a morbid fascination with tyranny and with dictatorship. I suppose like a lot of lads my age, we initially would get into fascination with things like Nazi Germany, but I quickly moved on. This is in the 1970s. I quickly moved on to a fascination with the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union obviously was still going in the 1970s. And it was, it never went away. We mentioned before, when I was at Liverpool Polytechnic, as it was then, John Moore's, we took one of our classes was Soviet politics. And I was the top of the class. It was the only thing I shone at, because I was always fascinated. How does it work? Even last night at 1 o'clock in the morning, I was watching a documentary about the Soviet Union in the 1980s. It wasn't a novel. It wasn't fiction. It was supposedly true. It was one of these AI-driven things, so you have to take it with a pinch of salt. But it's interesting sometimes how people's take on things differs from yours, and you learn a little bit more. Think, I've never thought of it that way before. But so I've always had this fascination with totalitarianism, and I've also aware that one of the undercurrents in Orwell's 1984 is that it tends to, I know it's considered a warning to all men and women, but really it's also like an extra warning to what you might call the Anglo-Saxon powers. England, the USA, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, or whatever. You often get it in their head. It's never going to happen to them. And as we know now, it is happening again. So, we're not exempt from falling for tyranny, is what I'm trying to say,
So it's interesting, the fact and the fiction, how they come together. I recently watched a television series that's strictly fiction called Nautilus, but it really has a lot of basis into the West India Company, and how that used to be so much of the British power and that expansion in history. But then you brought up a great point that just clicked in my head when you were talking about the Soviet Union. And I had read a documentary recently, or a theory recently, about was the fall of the Soviet manufacturer and Russia really strategically manipulated the world on that. And so I think it would be a super interesting kind of theory to keep pulling on that, right? Because that really does go into that whole Orwellian Ministry of Truth point, and kind of your book in 1954 and how all this juxtaposition and how everything could come together. So let's talk a little bit more about either of your books. As an author, what has inspired you? What has kept you going? What has kept you writing? Because so many people have a book in them, but they never get to the point of finishing. So what has helped you to get to that point?
I think a friend of mine once told me about an incident when we were in primary school. I don't know what you call it. It's elementary school in America. But it was that the teacher had given us a book to take home at the weekend. And I took Jules Verne's Around the World in 80 Days. And I'd read it by the Monday, and it'd be about 9 years old. And he said my friend said, the class was shocked that you'd read that book just in 2 days. And I can't remember the incident, to be honest. I can remember reading the book. But I've always been a massive reader. I tend to sort of, it's things I'm happy with, history, geography, things like that. I don't tend to stray from those parameters, if you like, I'm not into sport or anything like that. But so I knew, even when I was young, I thought you've got to write something in your life. Doesn't matter if it's just a single short story, you've got to write something. And I got the idea for the Architects of America when I was in my mid-30s, I think. And I thought, you've got to write this. There's absolutely no question. And then I'd done that. And then I thought, okay, yeah, you've done one book and what have you. And I also, like I say, I adored 1984, still do, by Orwell. I've read it about 10 times in my life. And the great thing about it is every time you read it, you read a slightly different book from the times before. That's part of its genius. And I thought, but the processes that led to Orwell's society, I don't think they've been properly covered, And I thought, if nobody else is going to do it, I'll do it. It's as simple as that. And I'm happy with it. I'm a very slow writer, though. I don't rush it, because I prefer to spend years working out a word here or a line there and what have you. So both my books have took nearly a decade each to write. But I've held down ordinary jobs while I've been doing it, ordinary lifestyle. I've just sat on the lawn sometimes and wrote it and what have you. And the number of versions I've gone through, I lost count,
No, great point. That, for some writers, it's that slow process. For other writers, I know for me, I tend to write a lot just like over a weekend or a week, like very manically. And then I have to do a lot of times just editing. I did put some links to my other books. So all my books this weekend, both today and tomorrow, are free for Kindle download. And one thing I'm going to say once again to everybody out there is the best thing you could do for authors is skim through our books. I know that Russell talked about, I read a book over a weekend. So if you can look through our books, we get our royalties through KENP and things like that. Definitely download our books. And the most important thing you could do for any author, if you like an author, if you're like, I have a friend who's an author, the best friend thing you can do is write a review. This is how the algorithms pick us up. So take a look at Russell's books, take a look at my books. Please go ahead and give us a little bit of love, a little bit of encouragement, because this is how the algorithms are going to change things. This is how, and I think this book, 1954, and what's going on in today's world could not be more timely. And so let's talk a little bit more. I do want to talk about that. If someone reads that book, what do you want them to take away in today's day and age?
I want them to take away. Obviously, like I said, it depends on where you are physically, where you are in the world if you read it. Because as I mentioned, I tend to think here and in the US that we do get complacent about things like freedom and democracy. And we're watching it now in real time that these are being assaulted. And I would like my book to get to people, for them to say, this is what could happen to us. Like I say, it's not Orwell's 1984. I wouldn't dare try and take that on, but it is to try and show the processes, from my knowledge of things like the USSR and Nazi Germany, the processes that lead to it, how it perverts minds and what have you. And there's people in your country now, they're banging on about freedom. They clearly don't believe in it at all. But the idea is, it is an extremely timely book. I must be frank and say that I started writing it when Donald Trump was president the last time around. And then I lost interest for a while. I didn't even look at it for 12 months at one point. But then I sort of come back to it and whatever. And I was writing it well. Like I say, it's set in London, by the way. It's set in the UK. It's not, it obviously makes allusions to America, having been knocked about in a war with the Soviet Union, what have you. But I can't get around that, obviously, and then mentions Australia. But generally, it's set in Britain. And what would happen here, because it's one of these rules that I try and stick to, is write about what you know about. So there's no point in trying to set it. I've been to the USA, but there's no point in trying to set it there. I wouldn't have known what it was like in the 1950s properly, except from old movies. But that's right. I think it's an extraordinarily timely book. The problem is, though, is marketing. This is the worst thing for any kind of author, I think, is you come up against the sort of block almost. Because nobody's really interested, and you sort of fall below the radar, and you're sitting there looking at what you think is an excellent piece of work, and nobody's interested, or apparently, But I couldn't have got better timing for it, to be honest. That's what I will say.
Russell, and I can't foot stomp it enough, is for anybody who wants to help an author out. I do a lot of helping author events and venues. Is really that marketing is so key. And so for people who don't know the data, the average indie author only sells 150 books, which is just a travesty, because there are so many great books out there. And that's why I do this show. I want to help out fellow authors by highlighting their books. So I highlight my books. We highlight this greater body of work together. So get out there, check out these books that Russell wrote. And I'm definitely pushing 1954 right now, because I just feel like that's such an important thing. And one of the things that I think is super important when you write that book is, when you were writing it, well, you mentioned you kind of had this 12-year gap, or not 12-month gap, excuse me. And when you had that gap in between the writing, what made you come back to it? Like, you said you kind of put it aside, but what made you come back and write this book?
It was a pretty mundane reason, really. My health was playing up a bit. I had to finish work for medical reasons. I'd had a stroke, basically. And,
I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's all right now. It was 4 years ago, but I struggle with, say, physical things, movement, because I've got arthritis as well. But so I had really nothing to do. I sort of took early retirement, if you like. So then, like, the book existed by then, but it was in a slightly rough, needed bits knocking off it and tidying up. So that was the real reason. But then I was watching the rise once more, the re-rise, if you like, of DJT, and I thought, this book fits with the times very, very neatly indeed. If only I can get some interest in it, So that's basically what happened. It was my health followed by events in your country.
Well, I appreciate that, Russell. And one thing I want to promise you is, I've obviously got a lot of authors throughout the rest of the day, but we're going to come back and we're going to make sure that we do a session where you could be on video and we can work that out, because I have a lot of flexibility. I teach university, so, and I'm also semi-retired myself. So I get this flexibility in the day. We are coming sort of toward the end of our session. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
Oh, I think we've covered everything really, but I'm quite happy you've took an interest in my novel, because like I say, it is more timely than the other one. Is more of a general theory about geography, but the novel, like I say, it is my fascination, and like I say, it's extremely timely. I couldn't have planned this better, quite frankly.
It is extremely timely. We have the links to Russell's book in the chat right now, and so please download his books, download my books, donate, buy some merchandise. We've got coffee cups, we've got wine glasses, we've got beer cups, all kinds of fun things. And so support your fellow authors, support if you're a reader out there. Just really appreciate your time, appreciate the likes, subscribes, and I'm going to bring Russell back. And we're going to make sure that he's on camera, but did want to keep the momentum going this morning in our marathon sessions. And I know we've got a couple people online. Any questions in the chat before we close up with Russell today? I'm looking in the chat and I'm looking at the eyeballs online, and I am not seeing anything. What I want to say is really appreciate the love from those of you who are watching right now, but also those who are going to be watching in the future. I'll make some clips from this, and I'm going to be working with Russell, and we're going to get his camera working. So thanks a lot, everybody. And our next author is going to be on in about 5 minutes. And that next author is Dilys Victoria, and looking forward to having her. Thank you, everyone, and see you in a few minutes. And thank you so much, Russell.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the time.